There are governments that rely on courts, procedures, and written law, and then there are governments that rely on spectacle. In the late 1990s, Afghanistan became a place where punishment was not hidden behind prison walls. It was brought into stadiums, into public squares, into spaces once meant for sport and gathering. And the people forced to watch understood something immediately. This was not just about enforcing rules. It was about sending a message. When the Taliban seized Kabul in 1996, they did more than replace a government. They replaced the entire structure of justice with a system designed to be seen. Verdicts were swift. Appeals did not exist. And women quickly became the most visible targets of enforcement. Because when punishment is public, fear spreads faster than force. And once fear becomes normal, control no longer needs constant violence. Before the Taliban took control, urban Afghanistan looked very different. In the 1970s, cities like Kabul, Herat, and Mazar-e-Sharif had universities filled with female students. Women worked as doctors, nurses, teachers, and office employees. Hospitals depended on female medical staff. Girls walked to school openly. In major cities, women moved through public life without constant surveillance. Afghanistan was still conservative in many regions, but in urban centers, women had visible roles in education and employment. That changed after the Soviet invasion in 1979. 10 years of war devastated infrastructure and displaced millions. When Soviet forces withdrew in 1989, civil war followed. Competing militias turned Kabul into a battlefield between 1992 and 1994. Rockets struck neighborhoods, law collapsed, corruption spread. By the time the Taliban emerged in 1994, the country was exhausted. They promised order. They promised moral discipline. They promised an end to warlord chaos. For many Afghans, stability mattered more than freedom. What few understood was that the version of order the Taliban offered required removing women from public life entirely. In September 1996, the Taliban entered Kabul and declared the Islamic Emirate of Afghanistan. The transition was immediate. Existing courts were dissolved and replaced with religious tribunals run by clerics loyal to Taliban leadership. There were no defense attorneys, no appeals process, no independent review of evidence. Verdicts were issued quickly, often within hours. At the same time, sweeping social restrictions were announced. Women were ordered to leave most workplaces. Girls' secondary schools were closed. Strict dress codes were enforced. Leaving home without a male guardian became grounds for questioning. Music, cinema, and many forms of public entertainment disappeared almost overnight. At first, some rules circulated as warnings. Then enforcement began. Taliban patrols appeared in markets and neighborhoods, questioning women about clothing, movement, and behavior. Accusations did not require formal complaints. Suspicion alone could lead to detention. This shift marked something deeper than a policy change. Law was no longer a system designed to resolve disputes. It became a tool to display authority. And once enforcement moved into public spaces, punishment stopped being private. It became part of everyday life. The most powerful shift did not happen inside courtrooms. It happened inside stadiums. Places once used for football matches and public celebrations were repurposed as sites of enforcement. Ghazi Stadium and the larger Kabul Sports Stadium became central stages where punishments were carried out in front of crowds. Attendance was often expected. Shops closed, people gathered. Watching was not optional. Women accused of violating dress codes, appearing in public without a male relative, attempting to work, or being suspected of moral offenses were brought into these spaces. Sentences were delivered quickly. Punishments followed immediately. The message was not directed only at the individual. It was directed at everyone watching. Public enforcement eliminated the need for widespread imprisonment. A single visible punishment could regulate an entire district. Families began restricting daughters long before patrols arrived. Neighbors avoided contact. Self-policing replaced resistance. This is how spectacle works. It transforms discipline into demonstration. When punishment is hidden, fear is limited to the accused. When it is public, fear spreads through observation. Even those who were not targeted adjusted their behavior. Women became central to this strategy because their visibility in daily life made them effective symbols. By controlling how women dressed, moved, and worked, the regime signaled total authority over society itself. The stadium was not just a location, it was a message. Public punishments were not random outbursts of anger. They were part of an organized system. At the center of that system was the Department for the Promotion of Virtue and the Prevention of Vice. Its officers patrolled markets, bus stops, and residential streets. They carried sticks and enforced dress codes, beard requirements, and movement restrictions. Their authority was immediate and rarely questioned. When someone was accused of violating Taliban rules, the case moved quickly to a religious judge aligned with the movement's leadership. There were no defense lawyers, no opportunity to challenge evidence, no appeals. Decisions were often delivered the same day. This structure created speed. Speed created fear. Families began adjusting before patrols arrived. Fathers restricted daughters' movements. Brothers escorted sisters even for short trips. Windows were covered with heavy curtains to prevent visibility from the street. Women who once worked in offices or hospitals stayed home. The enforcement machine did not need constant violence. It relied on uncertainty. Rules were often vague. Standards were inconsistently applied. That unpredictability forced people to assume the strictest interpretation at all times. Over time, obedience stopped being imposed. It became internalized. In late 2001, after the September 11th attacks in the United States, international military intervention dismantled the Taliban government within weeks. Kabul fell in November. Kandahar followed soon after. For the first time in 5 years, women stepped outside without permission from religious patrols. Girls' schools reopened. Universities admitted female students again. Women returned to hospitals, newsrooms, government offices, and public administration. On the surface, the system of public punishment had collapsed, but it had not disappeared. In rural districts where government presence remained weak, Taliban commanders rebuilt influence through shadow courts. These informal tribunals operated quietly, issuing judgments based on the same strict interpretations used in the 1990s. Punishments were less visible to international media, but the structure remained familiar. Rapid verdicts, no defense, immediate enforcement. Between 2002 and 2020, Afghanistan existed in two realities. Urban centers experienced cautious rebuilding. Rural areas experienced parallel authority. The enforcement model was no longer national, but it was never dismantled. On August 15, 2021, the Taliban entered Kabul again. This time, the collapse was faster. Government institutions dissolved within hours. Officials fled. The Islamic Emirate was declared once more. At first, Taliban spokesmen promised moderation. They told international media that women would be allowed to work and study within Islamic principles. They insisted the movement had changed. But within weeks, familiar patterns returned. Girls' secondary schools were closed. Women were told to remain home until security conditions improved. Female employees in ministries, banks, and media outlets were suspended. Strict dress codes were reintroduced. Then enforcement escalated. Provincial religious courts resumed issuing rapid judgments. Public punishments, initially limited and local, became more frequent. Orders from senior leadership instructed judges to fully implement traditional penalties under their interpretation of Islamic law. The structure looked almost identical to the 1996 model. Religious judges, no defense lawyers, swift sentences, public visibility. What had taken months to solidify in the 1990s reappeared within weeks. The system had not evolved. It had been waiting. Public punishment is not only about enforcing rules, it is about shaping behavior through visibility. When penalties are carried out in front of crowds, the audience becomes part of the system. Fear spreads through observation. People begin adjusting their lives not because they were punished, but because they saw what happened to someone else. Women were central to this strategy because their daily visibility made them powerful symbols. Restricting their movement, education, and work signaled total authority over society. In systems like this, spectacle replaces legal debate. Control no longer depends on constant force. It depends on normalization. If you want deeper breakdowns of how power shifts from law to intimidation, subscribe to Power Rot, where we analyze how control systems are built, enforced, and sustained.